Hey guys, Steve here, Aquaponics. Today we're going to talk about
Growing with fishes. Growing with fishes.
Really appreciate our next guest taking the time to come on. He is in the future currently. He is all the way in Monday already, way ahead of us.
8 a.m.
Yeah, 8 a.m. on Monday over there in Australia. So he is one of the, if not the world's biggest educator on aquaponics. He has a whole bunch of different classes and things available on his website, Aquaponic. Was it design course? Let me double check so I don't say it wrong. Aquaponicdesigncourse.com, and has a wonderful range of different things available there. And he's built facilities all over the world, growing all different types of crops. And he's going to talk to us a little bit about flowering crops and how that and how some of his experiences growing those types of crops that relate to cannabis and around the world. So thanks a lot for coming on.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here. I hope you can hear me okay. Can you? Good sound test there?
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. So how's things down there in Australia?
Well, we're probably suffering similarly to what you people are with this whole COVID-19 thing. We're slowly coming out of shutdown, which is good. All a bit overdone in my honest opinion, but anyway. The more chance of getting hit by a truck on your way home from work than you have of catching COVID-19. That's my personal opinion. I could be wrong, but you know.
Alrighty, well, so tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do. I gave you kind of a short intro. I'm sure you could give yourself a much better one.
Yeah, we've been doing aquaponics in the traditional way for 15 odd years now. And some 11 or 12 years ago, we started doing training. So, you know, that's just something that's evolved over time. And as a result of that, I've traveled quite extensively around the world, doing seminars and that sort of thing, and also visiting farm jobs that our students have built. And there's quite a number of very successful aquaponics facilities now around the world, particularly in the Middle East and India, particularly. Some big systems there, 1 acre plus in size, and they're all doing very, very well, which is great. Of course, we've got literally hundreds now of graduate students across the USA. That's our biggest group of students in the world. And yeah, we just opened another course yesterday, actually, Sunday, your time, our time. And that's being subscribed at about the normal rate. So it shows that there's still an interest in aquaponics. In fact, our last course that we ran in March was our biggest ever subscription. I think that was because of COVID-19. People were beginning to realise that, hey, I've got to do something about growing my own food or being somehow a little bit self-sustainable, you know, and if not completely, making sure I can contribute something to my food supply and food source. So that's basically where we're at. And of course, there's a bit of a crossover, of course, into your world there, Steve, with people growing cannabis. And we became very interested in that when my daughter got breast cancer. And of course, we turned to cannabis very quickly as a method of pain management. And I've got to tell you, it was miraculous, the difference that made to her. We saw it with our own eyes, how it helped her with her pain management. It was just unbelievable. She'd gone for probably 6 months, getting maybe 2 hours of sleep a night, you know, really bad. And when we finally got her the cannabis oil, she just used a small portion of it, probably as big as a grain of rice, I suspect, on her tongue. And she had 8 hours sleep that night. Amazing. And that continued to happen for her. So yeah, that's my interest in cannabis, of course. And she, like a lot of people I've found anyway, want to, if they do go on to using cannabis as pain management, once they've had cancer, they're very averse to any chemicals. So they don't want anything to do with chemicals. So that's why they're attracted to aquaponically grown cannabis, you know, because there's no chemical input.
Oh yeah. So tell us what some of your experiences have been from, I don't know if you've had a chance to talk to people that have done aquaponic cannabis that maybe have been students of yours, or and if you haven't, what have your experiences been with people growing peppers or cucumbers or very similar plants in aquaponics? What were some of the successful methods that worked for them, and in terms of allegory plants, if you didn't have that many with cannabis?
Well, when I first started going to America to do seminars, there was nowhere in America at that time where cannabis was legal to be grown. But often in classes, people would put their hands up and say, "Can you tell me, can we grow really, 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 really good tomatoes in aquaponics?" Took me a little while to work out that was code for cannabis. Could you grow cannabis? And of course, as you would well know, cannabis and tomatoes have a very similar nutrient requirement profile. So, if you can grow good tomatoes, you can grow good cannabis. That's what I've seen happen. And not that I've personally grown cannabis, but I've had students report back to me that if you can get good tomatoes out of a system, you can get good cannabis. Now, I don't know how your experience has been in regard to that, Steve, whether it's been similar or
not. So they're similar. I would say peppers are probably a slightly better one in terms of how they behave. And the one thing that would be different is tomatoes are a little bit more tolerant of higher nitrogen, I guess, than cannabis, and still give you good results. Would be the one caveat to that.
Yep, fair enough.
What convinced me, though, for sure, was once I was growing nice big red tomatoes. I was like, okay, I'm going to stop, believing all these people that say you could. Because when I started, 5 or 6 years ago, a lot of cannabis growers were very had a very negative outlook on aquaponics, and it didn't work and it was terrible and you weren't supposed to do it. But once I started growing tomatoes, and I was growing these big red tomatoes, and that's always been the adage, was that if you grow tomatoes, you grow cannabis. And that's when I said, okay, well, enough's enough. I'm going to give it a try, and never look back.
Yeah, I've had that report from other people as well. I find your comments interesting, Steve, about peppers being a bit closer, because peppers are a little bit more difficult to grow, I've found, than tomatoes itself. But yeah, they're very close. They're part of the same family, of course. But you remember some time ago I spoke to you about building a sand system, Steve, and we've had that running now for 22 months now, actually, and keeping good records, and we're finding we're getting fantastic results out of that.
That's good.
We've gone now.
Yeah, so we had somebody ask how is that going, because I saw you did the build for it, but then I haven't seen much update for it. So I was curious.
Yeah, we've been keeping records and doing lab tests and all that sort of stuff, and we're finding we're getting great growth. I've just started writing a book about it, actually.
Oh, cool.
Rather than do it by video, I was going to put a book out about it so I can show tables, etc., of the lab results. And I've say this very cautiously still, but I believe it's probably the way of the future for aquaponics. It's extremely simple, and it works very, very well. We get massive tomato growth, good fruit setting. So I'd be really keen for someone to try cannabis in it to see how it goes.
I think we have one person in our group, wasn't it? Like, I want to shout him out on the podcast, but I think we are in our Aquaponic Cannabis Growers group. I think we have one person that was at least testing or considering doing a sand bed with cannabis in it. So we'll definitely keep an eye out for that. Do you want to, for people that aren't familiar with IABs, do you want to give a simple explanation on the difference between a sand-based system and traditional aquaponics? What makes it easier or simpler?
Well, it's just sand to start with. It's got to be a fairly coarse sand, though. It doesn't work very well if it's a fine sand. And it operates on the idea of flood and drain. So you flood it. Our system, we flood it every 90 minutes. We flood it for 12 minutes. And the 12 minutes we've just found by trial and error is sufficient time to actually flood the beds. And then we let it completely drain for 90 minutes, and so the cycle goes. And at night time, we turn the pump off. We've got it operating on a photoelectric cell. So as soon as the sunlight depletes, then the pumping cycle doesn't go on anymore. But all night still we have water circulating through the fish tank and through a filter, a standalone filter, just to keep the fish water clean. and that operates all night. And as a result of that regime, we're running the system entirely off solar, which is great. It's another advantage because the pumping required is much lower than you do when you're pumping continuously in a traditional aquaponic system. And of course, the claims made by Dr. Mark McMurtry almost 40 years ago now, that system would remain stable once it's settled down, is we're finding to be absolutely true. Our pH has settled to about 6.4. We don't have to make any pH adjustments. And the whole system now, we have never, ever added any additives whatsoever to it, except in the first 3 months we added compost tea to give the system a bit of a kickstart. But since then we've added nothing, no potassium, no calcium, no iron, no phosphorus, added nothing. And we're getting fantastic commercial testing results on our tomatoes, because that's what we're growing mostly in the system is tomatoes, because of the idea that tomatoes are the hardest thing to grow and get a good result. So yeah, so we're getting terrific results, and it's just so simple. It just works, requires very little maintenance. The fish are happy. The system we've got has got about 35 square metres of growing area, and we have 125 jade perch, mature jade perch, which are all about 2 pounds each, around about that size in the system. And yeah, what else is there to say? It's so disgustingly simple. It's going to be a bit difficult to write a book about, actually.
So, quick question. So, Australia uses metric for measurements in English for weights, or they use standard for both?
How do you mean? You're talking about metric or imperial? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so you use kilometers or miles?
We use metric. You know, Steve, might become as a total surprise to you, but the whole world uses metric except the USA.
Oh no, it was just odd that you said pounds. That was what threw me off.
I did that. I did
kilograms.
the automatic conversion in my head because I know that you're in the USA. Sorry.
Oh no, it was cool. I just that was what threw me off, was that if they did weights on English and everything else was metric, because I thought everything was metric.
No, I've gotten used to having students in the USA. I just automatically drop stuff, pounds and stuff in. I have a little bit of trouble converting ounces, I've got to be honest, in my head, but yeah, no, it's all so they're all about a kilo each. Some of the fish are a little bit bigger than a kilo, some a little bit less, but they'd average out at a kilo each.
We had a question in chat. Are you using any worms in your beds?
There are worms in there. Worms have appeared. We haven't added any at any time, but they've appeared. Now, I suspect, I don't know how they get in there, but I suspect they've gotten in there because of, you know, when we've transplanted plants in out of our seed raising area, then we would have got maybe some worm eggs in there. But there's definitely worms in there. Yeah, they're in there having a party. And we find if we leave a tomato full sometimes because we fail to pick it in time, and next thing you know, there's worms up from underneath into the tomato going for their life.
What other methods have you worked with or experimented with maybe in the last couple of years that you've also found interesting, maybe in other directions?
We've just experimented with supplementation in our regular aquaponic systems. We try to avoid using anything other than seaweed extract or kelp powder or natural means like that. We make our own worm tea, and we also make our own compost tea to add to it, to add to the systems. And that's how we supplement our regular aquaponic systems. And we find that they're all pretty old now. Like the oldest one is 15 years old, and the youngest one's 7 or 8 years old as far as regular ones go. So they're all very well established. And yeah, we had an interesting thing happen to us a little while ago, though, actually, and that is the one of the systems. We had to switch over to tank water for the whole area because we're in the middle of a drought here, and our dam had gone dry, so we had to switch to tank water for our systems. And tank water has got no carbonates in it. Tank water, by that I mean rainwater, had no carbonates in it. So we had a dramatic drop in pH in one of the systems in particular. And over a period of about 3 weeks, the pH had dropped below 6, got down to about 5.4, something like that. And interestingly, what had happened is we started to have an ammonia spike. Now, I had to think about that for a little while, what was causing that, but the pH getting that low was causing a reduction in our beneficial organisms population. And so the ammonia being produced by the fish wasn't being processed quickly enough. So we had this ammonia spike. Really interesting situation. I've never experienced it before. And of course, the solution to it was to add some carbonates in the form of hydrated lime or calcium carbonate and get that pH back up into the normal range as quickly as possible. So we've seen that before too. We've got a farm we built here about 2 hours drive from where I live for a client, and he had a similar situation. He was testing his water with a standard freshwater test kit. And of course the pH reagent test in that will only read down to pH 6. So he was making the classic mistake of testing his pH every couple of days and thinking, oh, it's good, it's stable at pH 6. But in actual fact, it was drifting far lower. And when we got to the farm, because he had the identical situation, he said, I've got an ammonia spike. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I'm feeding the same amount of feed, blah, blah, blah. So I went up to his farm and we took the electronic tester with us, and guess what? The pH was 4.4. Unbelievable. You'd wonder how the fish had even survived. And I guess they had because the pH had dropped down to that, you know, over several weeks. So same routine, had to raise the pH, add carbonates. And why it happened to him was because part of the reason for him was he was using town water or municipal water, which of course, once again, is very, very low, if totally non-existent in carbonates in the water. So that's just something to think about, you know, for people to be aware of. If you're using town water or rainwater, you can have a problem with no carbonates and a loss of beneficial organisms in the system.
What are some of the different successful designs? I know you have a whole course on this. What are some of the different designs that you teach that are successful in your courses?
Well, we pretty much do the same thing all the time now because we've proved it works. We've got several farms built using the system. We have a sump, you know, everything goes back to the sump. We only have one pump, which is either in the sump or beside the sump. It pumps from the sump to a distribution tank or a header tank. And then the water is distributed around the system to the various points by gravity and by a manifold. And we adjust the flow to each system, to each part of the system, at a flow rate that is suitable for that part of the system. And yeah, and then all the water flows back to the sump. It's quite simple, really. And it just works extraordinarily well because we find the flow rate for raft beds is different to the flow rate for media beds. And yeah, so you can adjust the flow individually quite easily. The other advantage of doing it that way, of course, is that you can isolate any part of the system when you need to. If you want to do maintenance of some sort, you can isolate a particular bed or a particular row of beds quite easily. When it comes harvest time, you can isolate a particular fish tank. So there's lots of advantages of doing it that way.
So what fish species have you seen people have a lot of success with in aquaponics?
Well, tilapia is the big one, of course, believe it or not, because it's a very hardy fish. I know in some parts of the world it's got a bad reputation that people say it's awful to eat. And that's obviously because they've had a bad experience with supermarket tilapia or something. But tilapia is the big one. And after that, across parts of Asia and that, they use a lot of European carp. In those parts of the world, they like to eat that. Once again, they're a very hardy fish as well. They survive well. In Australia, our most used fish is jade perch and silver perch, which are native to Australia. Trout in the colder regions, people grow trout very successfully. I wished I could grow trout, but it's too hot where I live. They're the main ones. In India, there's some interesting fish species that I can't even repeat the names of that some of the farms use because, once again, they're local, freshwater local species. So the rule of thumb, if you can, is to use a local freshwater species because it's going to work better for you than having some exotic fish from far away. I think in America, a lot of people use crappie fish. Is that one they use? And bluegill?
Bluegill,
and also channel catfish too.
Yep. Channel catfish can be a little bit trickier if you're not as experienced with aquaculture, but are a great option. But they are scaleless, so that you gotta go, deal with a few extra challenges because of that. Tell us a little bit more about filtration. There's a lot of different theories on filtration. What works and what doesn't that you've seen out there? Because you've seen quite a bit.
Well, we go for the simple approach, as we call it, and that is using a settlement tank, which is sometimes called a swirl filter and sometimes called a clarifier, but it's the same principle. And many, many years ago, Dr. James Riccozzi wrote a paper about this. And I don't know if he was the first one to proclaim this, but he certainly said in his papers about the 20-minute rule. And that is, if you pass your water directly from your fish tank through a settlement tank, and it takes 20 minutes for the water to pass through that tank, then 98% of the solids will drop out, just simply drop out, settle out. So it's the simplest form of filtration there is. And we find it's very, very effective. You can get fancy with there's all sorts of filters that people will say are wonderful and great. But we try to promote the simple approach, especially when you're building a farm for someone in a third world country, for example. No good buying and installing for them, a very fancy bead filter or whatever, because the maintenance is too high. Whereas a settlement tank, you can look into it, you can see the stuff in the bottom, open a valve, drain it, clean it, carry on. 20-minute rule. It's just that simple.
Somebody asked you, have you worked with anyone growing root crops?
Yes, we've grown root crops extensively, and we've come to the conclusion a long time ago that they are better off in a wicking bed rather than an aquaponic system. You can grow potatoes and carrots and all that kind of thing in a media bed, but you'll get better results in a wicking bed. And the wicking bed can be part of your aquaponic system in the sense that you use fish water to water it with. And you can have it there as part of your system if you're thinking about growing your vegetable supply for the home. They work extraordinarily well. You can grow anything in a wicking bed, anything at all. And that's a wicking bed, not a wicker bed. Wicking bed. W-I-C-K-I-N-G, wicking bed. An Australian invention, I have to tell you.
Wicker beds don't hold water too well.
No, that's right, yes. Yeah, but a number of people come up and call them wicker beds. I don't know why they do, but they do.
So someone asked, are all the systems attached to the same fish tanks in that design?
Yes. Either a single fish tank or a number of fish tanks. In larger farms, we usually have a system of 6 fish tanks. And those 6 fish tanks will feed to the same sump and to the same distribution tank, and feed all the beds, whatever beds you've got, whether they're raft beds or media beds, and the water goes back to the sump by gravity. So the only place you pump, and of course the bigger the farm is, the more efficient it becomes to pump just from the sump to the header tank or the distribution tank. Shorter distance to pump, and you can run everything else everywhere by gravity.
Very cool. Someone else asked, can you use crayfish instead of or alongside fish?
Yeah, you can. They have to be in a separate tank. Crayfish, I think you call them crawfish in America, don't you? We call them yabbies here.
If you're in the south, they're crawfish. If you're in the north, they're crayfish.
Depends where you come from, eh? Yeah, so, yeah, but they're angry little things. They fight each other. And the ones we have here in Australia are difficult to raise in the sense that they fight. And so a lot of people, especially homeowners, with home systems, often start out wanting to grow them, and most of them abandon them after a while because they're just too hard.
So somebody else asked, is there an ideal depth for the sand beds?
Yeah, we've gone with 300 millimeters or 1 foot, staying with that because that's standard. All the grow beds we ever build are always 1 foot deep, so we just stick with the standard of that, and it works very, very well, we found. I think it could be a bit deeper if you wanted to be, but I wouldn't go any shallower. You need that filtration. See, the sand bed is your filter, and the sand is the most magnificent filter, as anyone knows who has a swimming pool. The most efficient swimming pool filter you can have is a sand filter. It will collect all the solids, and it really, really will. It returns beautifully clear water to your fish tank. And of course, the whole idea is that the microbial activity sets up in the sand as it would in soil. And so eventually when the thing settles down, you get this fantastic microbial activity, because you just got to go back to thinking about a rainforest. It doesn't matter if it's tropical or subtropical rainforest. You don't have to have a government department running in there every week spreading fertiliser around, do you? Or nutrients, or part A, part B of a nutrient to make something grow, because nature knows what to do. If you have got a soil-like structure and you feed it properly, in other words, you know, fish waste, compost tea, all those kind of things that occur naturally in nature, you will ultimately, I believe, have all the nutrients present that are needed. Now, I know that doesn't go over too well with people who are into hydroponics, but different world, I guess. Different world.
So we had another question is, can you talk more about backup systems, especially with the loss of electricity?
Yeah, we believe that every system should have a backup system on it, and ours are all run on a battery bank, which is charged off solar panels, and each fish tank has attached to it by one method or another a float switch, a simple float switch, that if the water level begins to drop for any reason, then that float switch will drop and we'll switch on a backup system. In addition to that, we have a float switch that's attached to a relay that is kept in the open position when the mains power is on. Of course, if the main power fails, the contacts close and switch on a 24 volt or 12 volt DC pump to spray water over the surface of the fish tank, because aeration is a function of increasing the surface area of the fish tank, and you do that very effectively by spraying water over the surface. And of course, if you're drawing that water from the bottom of the fish tank, you're also circulating water in the fish tank at the same time, thus preventing stratification occurring. So it's a very effective and cheap and simple way to have a backup. Anyone that doesn't have a backup system is crazy. And I'm just totally always surprised at the number of people that build systems. Some people build quite large systems and don't have a backup, and they pay for it, because when it happens, it usually happens when your fish are all at a nice size, they're functioning well, and you're starting to think about barbecues, and the power will go off and you lose all your fish. It's devastating. Devastating. In fact, it's the point at which a lot of people give up aquaponics and don't do it anymore. They're so devastated. And they would have prevented all that if they'd had a backup system. It only needs to be able to run for 6 or 8 hours at the most, because if you're away, you need some kind of an alert, I guess, to tell you that the power's gone off, or a neighbour or a friend or something. But if it's at home or you're on the farm, you will know that the power's gone off. So it gives you 4 or 5 hours to do something about it, start your backup generator or some other method that you will use to restore the power to the system. So that's the story on backups. Absolutely essential, I believe.
What someone asked, what worm species do you recommend for aquaponics? I've heard about red wigglers. What other ones would you recommend?
We've only got red wrigglers, and most people seem to have red wrigglers, or composting worms they're often referred to as, and they work the best. So I understand, and I think they're the ones that seem to survive the best. So why change it? Stick with them.
Someone else asked, can you tell us more about pest management in aquaponics?
We're letting all our secrets out now. We've done all sorts of things over the years to try and manage pests in a organic way. Garlic spray, chili spray, molasses spray, on and on it goes. But now we simply use neem oil mixed with white oil, and we spray during the summertime 3 times a week, and we don't have any pest problems whatsoever. If we fail to spray though for a week because we get lazy or whatever, we have pest problems. Because neem oil acts more as a repellent rather than a killer, and that's why you need to apply it fairly frequently. And so does white oil. White oil works that way. And when the two are together, it's one of those cases where 1 and 1 is more than 2. 1 and 1 make an effectiveness of a value of 3 or 4 in that particular instance we've found, and it just works extraordinarily well. So take that one from me. If you do that and you spray 3, summertime, you must spray 3 times a week. And you must also learn how to spray, and that's to spray up under the leaves. So many people go into a greenhouse and just wave the spray around, sprinkling spray around like a priest in mass. They sprinkle it around, they think that's going great. But all the bugs are hiding under the leaves, laughing with their umbrella up, And you spray on top, nothing happens, the bugs are still there. You've got to spray up underneath and spray thoroughly. And if you do that with neem oil and white oil mixed, you won't have a bug, guarantee it.
Awesome. I know Marty had some questions.
Come on, Marty, speak up.
What was that?
Said I know you had some questions.
Oh, I didn't know I had some questions, but that's okay. So I just wanted,
marriage or relationships, I can't help you, sorry.
right? So besides, I know we talked about crayfish a little bit, but there are there any other things you like to use for feed, like black soldier flies, or do you have any preference for being able to raise your own fish food? What have you seen people be successful with as far as producing your own fish food, or alternatives, like if you know of a good fish food for your overall diet?
We ran a trial for 12 months in the system we have here, which has got two 1,000 litre or 250 gallon tote tanks on it. And we put in it at the beginning of the trial 60 jade perch in each tank, our little fingerlings, new ones. And we fed them for 12 months. One tank was fed on regular fish pellets, fish feed pellets, commercially available fish feed pellets of 38% protein. And the other tank was fed for the entire time on vegetable matter that we grew on site or we harvested on site. And we did that for a whole year just to see what would happen. And we kept fairly good records of it. And we found at the end of the period of time, strangely enough, in the tank that was being fed on the regular fish pellets, commercially available fish pellets, we had 6 deaths, which we just put that down to natural attrition, which happens sometimes. But in the one that they were fed on the vegetable matter, we had no fish deaths. At the end of the 12 months when we had a weigh-in, the fish that were fed on the regular fish pellets were about 15% heavier than those on the basic vegetarian diet. Now, these fish we used were jade perch, which are by nature vegetable eaters. That's what they are. So they did very well on the diet. And over the period of time, we tried all sorts of things. We'd throw old lettuce in there that we got a bit old. They'd eat that. We tried silver beet. We fed them alfalfa, and they liked alfalfa. That went well. But in the end, what we did was my wife and I started juicing. So the pressings out of the juice, which had carrots and cucumber and kale and all sorts of other things, we would juice. We would mix that up with some chicken eggs, which we've got our own chickens here, and some wholemeal wheat flour, and we'd bake it in the oven, spread it out so it was like a biscuit, about, let's say about ½ inch thick, and we'd bake it in the oven and produce these biscuits out of it. And that was the most effective fish feed we found, and most convenient for us, because we would have that in the freezer, and we made a fair quantity of it, and we would just throw a few biscuits into the fish tank, and because they were frozen, they'd float, so we could see the fish come up and they'd gnaw away at them. They really loved it. So because we had chicken eggs in it, obviously had a lot of protein in it for that point of view. And yeah, so that's a summary of how we did with that, and it was very effective. And since then, we just feed mostly standard fish food pellets of 38% protein to all our systems. We've got 7 systems we run. Mostly that's because I'm getting older. I think I'm getting lazy. So it's easy to do. But I know full well now that if we had to produce our own fish food, we most certainly could with the species of fish that is by nature a vegetable eater. So we've got a few of them in Australia, jade perch, silver perch, and they're very good for that kind of thing. I don't know what you've got in the USA that would fit that bill, but tilapia certainly will. Tilapia will eat anything, basically, and do well on it. So I believe it is possible to be sustainable in growing your own fish. The downside to aquaponics, of course, is the need for power. So that's another reason why I like the sand system and I'm liking it more and more, because the power requirements for it are much, much lower than a regular aquaponic system. And we are running off solar panels and running quite successfully. The only time we have to add mains power is if we have, let's say, a week of wet weather, which is so rare these days. But if you're living in a place where you have a lot of overcast weather, then solar's not so good, as you know.
So what other things?
Sorry. Did you notice any difference in plant growth in your 2 systems when you were feeding the different stuff? Was or
No,
are you in
that
contact?
that particular trial, we're going to start another one come January. It's similar, but we're going to separate them into two separate systems. But that one, those two fish tanks were feeding into the one system. And we wanted to do that so that we knew that the water temperature and water conditions were exactly the same for both lots of fish. So come January, we're going to run another one. We'll set up the same system, but we'll split it, and we'll have two different sets of grow beds for it, so we can have different water. And we'll run that and see what kind of growth we get. I think the growth might be a little bit lower, but then again, it might not either, because we're adding the chicken eggs, you see, into the feed, which is going to give it a lot of protein. But it'll be interesting to see, and of course, then we'll do some lab tests on the tomatoes we grow, of course, and see what kind of nutrient we get out of it and see how good it really is. In the final analysis, that's the only way you can do it, is with a lab test and find out what's in the leaves of the plants and the water in the end. And you've got to do it over a year too. It takes a long time to do these tests to get any real results out of them, because you can't gauge something on just a couple of months. Particularly with aquaponics, you've got to allow the system to settle, and that can take 4 or 5 months anyway before it settles down and starts to behave in a normal pattern. And of course, if you start with fingerlings as well, small fish, they have to grow and get some size to them, so that could take 3 or 4 or 5 months anyway. So you need to do at least a 12-month trial. That's what I believe. I think that's the holy grail of it. When I've read Dr. Mark McMurtry's papers, that was what drove him. He didn't get any notoriety much, which is a bit of a shame, I think, that his work didn't get much notice. And I've talked to a lot of people that actually knew him, and evidently he was a person, as they say, with a very unfortunate personality. It's the nicest way of putting it. And he didn't make many friends. In fact, he made a few enemies. And I've tried to find out why it was his work was never taken much notice of, and that's the only reason I can find or come up with. Because when I first started doing the sand, a number of people told me not to waste my time, because if it was any good, it would already be being done. And that kind of thing drives me on to say, well, why isn't it being done? Is that the only reason? Like monkey sees as monkey does. It's a bit like this COVID-19 thing. The whole world, all the leaders have all copied off each other and locked everyone down and not tried to find a different way of doing things. And I think that's a bit like that in the aquaponics world too, Anyway, we've found that his system works pretty well. And what drove him to experiment with it was he wanted to come up with a system that was simple to operate and easy to operate, and could be done in third world countries where electricity was limited, and also facilities like, material for floating rafts, for example, was limited, and all that sort of thing. So he figured, well, sand is pretty much everywhere, and all you need is a fish tank and some fish, and we'll see if it'll work. And his experiments, if you take the trouble to read his paper, they're quite astonishing, actually, the results he obtained.
So I know that you've helped work with some people that were doing some interesting stuff, I believe, with cosmetics as well. Do you want to touch on that? There's a lot of people that are doing cannabis products and might want to diversify and do that as well. Or maybe they're limited on canopy space right now, but they could bring that space online and grow those types of crops to support their business until they could get that licensed. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, the information I have from that is from a very large aquaponics farm built by 2 of my students in South Korea. Actually, when I was there, it was covering 165,000 square feet. That's a big farm. And they were producing at that time mostly leafy greens. And they had started producing cucumbers, and were just starting to produce tomatoes. I believe now the farm is about a third bigger again now, what it was then. Staff of 100, can you believe that? A massive operation. And they had branched into supplying cucumbers and leafy greens of different kinds to be used in cosmetic manufacture. And the cosmetic manufacturers had tested the stuff and had laboratory tested and found that the aquaponically produced products had a far better nutrient profile than anything else they'd tested before, either grown hydroponically or in organic farms. So that was something, and of course that opened up a whole world for that particular farm to produce these products for these manufacturers, because organic cosmetics are very big in South Korea, As the owner of the farm described, he said Koreans are very sensitive about the skin. You know, they want to keep their skin nice. I guess most people are, but they seem to think they're more worried about that than anyone else. And that's more important to them than anything else. And so that opened up a whole world of producing crops for the cosmetic industry. And I think it's a very, and of course, the interesting thing is they projected their sales for that would increase over the next 6 months by 25%. And we've actually got a video about that in our training course. And students often ask, how can they increase by 25% in 6 months? That seems like a wild claim. And the claim is because of the increased pricing they are going to be getting for their cosmetic product that they're selling to the cosmetic companies. So, you know, I think that's a large untapped field really for regular aquaponics growers to look at and suss out. Those markets that add value, you know, add value rather than just selling lettuce at the farmer's market on a Sunday morning. There's got to be ways to add value.
Yeah, I think a lot of aquaponics is still kind of stuck on the lettuce model because that was the one thing that was kind of shown that was easy, but there's a lot more potential that aquaponics has. What's some of the other non-lettuce crops that you guys have grown over the years? Well,
we've experimented with a lot of different Asian greens. We supply a restaurant at the moment that's run by a Thai fellow. He's got 2 restaurants, very successful restaurants. Actually, we built a farm for him because he's that keen on aquaponics. He wanted his own farm. And, you know, he's got a lot of different plants. And I've got to be honest, I don't even know what the hell they are that he's got there, and grows them quite well and uses them in his different recipes that he has. So, you know, there's a lot of specialty crops that you could, as a farmer, grower, suss out in your own local area. You know, find those kind of restaurants that do things differently and supply them, rather than just trying to flog your lettuce off on a Sunday morning at the farmer's market. And that's what I think is important, don't you, Steve? It's you know, people want to know, can you make a living out of aquaponics? Well, it's like any business. You have to specialise. You have to be smart about what you're doing and find interesting ways to market things. And I think that's happening in the cannabis world, isn't it, too? I was in Oregon, last trip I did overseas before this whole, you know, this virus thing started, was to Oregon. And I visited a few places there that were growing cannabis, and they were, you know, had producing cosmetics of different kinds and all sorts of products. And I thought, and there was a lady running one particular place, and she was very, very clever with her, you know, her marketing, her designs of her labels and things. And I thought, wow, that's a way to make more money out of a small farm than just growing lettuce, for goodness sake. There you go. Look at that. Steve's got one. Beautiful box. What's the design like on the front? Give us a look. You're moving a bit too fast, mate. Lovely. Look at that. See, there you go. Oh, you know, see, cannabis has got a lot of potential in that regard, hasn't it? There's really a lot of potential.
Oh yeah, no, I always tell people you want the best thing to invest in the whole cannabis industry is this right here, packaging, because sales are only going to go up, and you know, there's only one direction that any of those guys are going to go. You know, as more and more states come online, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, there's more to it than just smoking it, eh?
Oh yeah. Well, you know, depends on what part of the industry you want to get involved in, I guess.
Yeah, unfortunately here in Australia, it's still not legal. They say it is, but the big pharmaceutical companies have done a number on the government, and to get a license to grow it here, you've got to be a millionaire. It's just very disappointing. We're hoping that'll change a little bit, but not really at the moment. Still basically an underground industry, you know.
Hopefully they'll ease up. I've been working with the guy down there on a license application for one to hopefully get a license, but it's been kind of a mixed bag on the slow slog to get their stuff through. So, which I'm sure has been for many people down there.
Yep. Sure.
Someone else I was going to ask as a follow up. Oh, was there anything that maybe you found that you added to aquaponics that worked really awesome but wasn't commercially viable or didn't really make sense, but maybe you're just like, holy crap? Oh, I remember the question I was going to ask earlier that I was really dying to ask you. In a soil, you don't want to plant brassicas or things like that because they'll kind of slow down the plant growth of the nearby plants. Have you found anything in aquaponics that you shouldn't grow near other plants, or maybe you should only grow by itself, or vice versa? Anything that's maybe synergistic to grow near each other in aquaponics specifically?
Not really, Steve, no. When I first started doing aquaponics, I planted all sorts of crazy things because, you know, you try things because that's what you can do. But now we just stick with growing leafy greens and corn and tomatoes and cucumbers and all the regular things that people eat on a regular daily basis. I certainly don't try and grow Jerusalem artichokes anymore or anything like that. But I don't find there's any problems. It's just like, I just liken it to the rainforest floor. You know, things grow side by side because plants take up whatever nutrient they want and ignore the rest. And that's how it works in nature and how it works in a good aquaponic system. Once it's established, is plants will take the nutrient they want and they ignore the rest. And there might be some plants that don't like each other, but we haven't encountered it.
Very cool. Yeah, no, I was just curious on that. We often do companion planting just to help with various aspects of growing, or we'll do bait plants as well. So I was kind of curious to see. Yeah.
Bok choy is a bait plant.
Bok choy is?
Yeah, insects from across the world will come to a bok choy plant.
Good to know. I found was it cilantro? Cilantro is the absolute favorite thing for root aphids. If you have root aphids in a facility, you put a cilantro plant in there, within 48 hours they will find it.
Eggplant's another one. If you plant eggplant, aphids love eggplants for some strange reason. So we like to grow eggplant because we like to eat it, and so we spray that very carefully 3 days a week to keep the aphids away. If we don't, man, the aphids are in there, like as if there's some kind of world aphid convention being carried out.
Eggplant's good because Aureus love to hang out on eggplants. So it's a good banker plant too, aside from just being a good bait plant.
What did you say?
Aureus is the pirate bugs. You know pirate bugs? Yeah, so the genus is Aureus. There's 3 different species they use in the United States, so we just call them Aureus just to make it easier for everybody. Yeah. Peppers, such as like your ornamental peppers or peppers that are continuously flowering really rapidly, chili peppers, anything like that is a good banker plant because they can feed on the pollen. When they don't have protein to feed on, they can jump over and feed on the pollen instead. So, but
how do you spell that?
The insect or the
insect Aureus.
The insect is Aureus, Orious, Aureus. Or did I spell that wrong? Somebody in chat want to correct me. But Aureus, they're called minute pirate bugs. They're really awesome for cannabis. They're really great generalists to release with lace wings. If you're going to do especially a good combo, lace wings, them, and rove beetles can fly through a greenhouse and immediately gravitate towards any problem area. If you have a hot spot that you don't know about, they'll all hunt it down. They're very good at that. The downside with Aureus is they can bite you. They will leave welts on you that are similar to mosquito bites. If you screw with them, but they are very, very good little pests, predator, and very easy to keep around if you have banker plants such as the rapidly flowering peppers, or in your case, we were talking about eggplants. Anything that's going to continuously produce heavy amounts of pollen is going to help them stick around.
That's an interesting piece of information. Thank you.
Yeah. There's quite a few different other, rove beetles and lots of predators will fall back to feeding on pollen as a secondary source. Again, if you don't have any insects around, that's a good thing, but they got, you don't want them to go away. So it gives them something to feed on, and they can kind of, it's not their favorite food, but it's a survival food.
Yeah. Oh, good information. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else you wanted to mention? How do people find out more about your classes? What are some of the different classes that you offer? We got about 10 minutes left. What are some of the different things that you offer for people to educate themselves? Because you have quite a wide range of different educational tools.
I'm just typing address in here. I don't know if my chat goes to everyone or not, I don't know. But that's our main website, and our other website is aquaponicsdesigncourse.com, and that's the one we run our online course through, which is our biggest course that we do. And of course we do face-to-face courses, which has been decimated a little bit by the whole COVID thing, but hopefully soon that will go away or go back into the background somewhere, and we'll be able to continue running them. But that's mostly what we do. And those online courses have been very successful. We've got a Facebook page which is just Aquaponics Design, and we've got 650,000 followers on that, which is massive, and just shows the overall interest there is in aquaponics and sustainable growing around the world. And it's just amazing. Our follower group is, the biggest group is the USA, the second biggest group is India now, and then the third biggest group is Australia, and then followed by Europe. And of course you've got all sorts of other countries in between there, Saudi Arabia, and you know, the Arab countries have been decimated by COVID. You don't hear much about them in the news, but they've been decimated. Of course, a lot of people there are starting to think about food supplies and how can they maintain stuff, you know. When aeroplanes stop flying, people can't get supplies from all sorts of places, and it's made a lot of people start to think about growing food, at least as much as you can. I doubt if you grow all your food in your backyard, but you could certainly grow a lot to help you through tough times.
Yeah,
Apart from the whole argument.
I was going to say, definitely seen an uptick in people being interested in producing their own food, or as much as they can. And, you know, I feel like sometimes people, you know, don't do what they can just because they say, oh, well, I can't do everything. I can't grow enough to support myself, so I might as well just buy everything from the store. You know, you can produce a lot, even if you don't do everything for all the months out of the year. You know, you can definitely provide a lot for yourself and save a lot, and at least have the skills so that everything does, you know, go to hell in a handbasket. At least you still have the skills and some of the stuff that you need there to make it happen. So
It's 2020. You never know what might happen. It's 2020.
Yeah. I mean, how would we ever have thought what has happened in the last 9 months would ever happen? How would you know, a year ago, if someone would have painted the scenario, you'd have thought they're crazy. You said, how can it possibly happen? And it has happened. And, you know, people have been devastated by it. I mean, in Australia here anyway, and I guess it's the same in America, those that are on the public purse, you know, the bureaucrats, they're totally unharmed by it. Their wages still drop out of the sky every fortnight. But those that are in private enterprise, those that are trying to grow, you know, run a restaurant or tourism or anything like that, there's thousands of them here in Australia have just been sent totally broke. They'll never recover, of losing their houses, and the bureaucrats don't care. They say they do, but they couldn't actually care less. We had a report here recently where someone was saying, some real estate bloke was saying that there's a transfer of wealth is going on. There's people in private enterprise are losing their homes, and guess who's buying them? Cashed up public servants. So, you know, but anyway, it's another whole subject. It's a good reason for us to try to be self-sustaining as much as we possibly can, I think. If you live on a small suburban block, it's amazing what you can grow in a very small space using aquaponics or wicking beds or something similar. All you got to do is change your diet a little bit and be a little bit more leaning towards being a vegetable eater rather than a meat eater. And, you know, you can grow stuff. It's amazing what you can grow, and grow relatively easily, actually.
Oh yeah, you can grow anything I've found in aquaponics. Sometimes you might have to adjust your method a little bit, but you can grow, and how the roots are set up. But other than that, you can grow anything in aquaponics for sure. Even cactuses. We've germinated cactuses in aquaponics.
Have you really?
To prove that you could do it. Oh yeah, I got pictures to prove it.
We have massive aloe vera plants growing in our gravel beds. In fact, we pull them out and throw them in the compost pile, and they still continue to grow. Yeah, aloe vera like you've never seen before. And of course, that's supposed to be a desert plant growing in aquaponics. It doesn't make sense, but it does.
Oh yeah, we've germinated plenty of prickly pear cactuses
Yeah.
and then transplanted them into soil afterwards just to accelerate that early growth stage and stuff like that. So,
Yep.
yeah. All right. Well, anything else you'd like to share with people before we let you go?
Hey, Steve, there was one more question from chat. They were asking if they can still sign up for your class that started yesterday.
Yeah, of course. Well, this is sign up week as we call it. And we run through till about Thursday or Friday until the class is full up. And yeah, and then week one starts next Sunday morning. And the way it works is every week there's another batch of lessons are released, opened up for you to see and to watch the videos. There's a comment section under each video where people ask questions about the video. And once a week I run a webinar on Zoom, just like you guys are doing now, for our students. And that's interesting because I run it at my time is 11 a.m. in the morning, Friday morning. And that San Francisco time for that is about 5 p.m. in the afternoon before, on a Thursday afternoon, and various other time slots around the world, of course. And that works really well. We get students get on, particularly students from India and those places who don't have English as their first language, so they can understand the verbals better than they can read the stuff, I think, sometimes. But we still have a lot of people from around the world on that, and that works very, very well. All the videos are all subtitled in English. So if my accent is a problem for you, you can read the words. I don't have an accent, actually.
Well, so to me, I just came back from Zimbabwe, right? So like the British Zimbabwe and British Australian is like not that different. So to me, you just sound normal, but I can understand other people have problems.
Yeah. People tell me I have an accent, but there's the old saying, no one has an accent until you leave home.
What was that? I'm sorry.
No one has an accent until you leave home.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and sharing your knowledge.